Make a Nastic movement. Hey guys, welcome to Season 1, Episode 12 of the Every Plant Story podcast, the podcast where we share all the behind the scenes and all kinds of other plant stories from here at the life of Gabriella Plants and around our plant community. My name is Shane Malloy, and I'm the owner and president of Gabriella Plants. And with me on today's podcast, we have co-host Zach back with us.
Howdy, howdy.
Zach is our media director for Gabriella Plants, and back with us today, by popular demand, is Brett Weiss, who is our head grower at Gabriella Plants.
Hi, guys.
All right, so I don't have a whole lot of housekeeping today, Brett. Let's be real. But I texted you a couple days ago, Zach. I texted Brett, and I said, we got to do a podcast. What do you want to do a podcast on? You got all kinds of ideas. And then he threw some words out at me, which I had asked for the definitions, of course. So I knew it was a good start. And that's when I said, okay, then let's just get together at this time and let's do it. So, Brett, what do you have for us today?
Today we are going to be talking about plant movements.
Plant movements. Get a little bit closer to the microphone. Yeah, there we go. All right. So tell me all about plant movements.
All right, so all organisms move. As a living organism, it's kind of one of the key factors to be alive is movement.
Ah, I remember this. This is biology from
exactly.
like 5th grade. Okay.
Okay, yeah,
So,
it's all coming back.
Some organisms move faster than others, obviously. And I do hear a lot that, plants, they don't move. And that's not entirely true.
I mean, they'll like wave to you. I mean, did you see Zach's TikTok of the Prince of Orange dabbing?
No.
I would call that a different type of movement. The plants are slowly evolving to be able to do that. We're talking about, classic plants.
But not animation. We're talking about plants actually move. But they will like bend to the light and stuff.
So
I mean, I've seen that.
We are going to talk about some of that. So there are two different types of plant movements. There are tropisms and nastic movements. So tropisms are when a plant moves in regards to an external stimuli. So there are tropisms like phototropism, which is a movement in regards to light, gravitropism, which is movement in regards to gravity, which we will get into.
Okay.
And then there are nastic movements, which is plant movements in regards to internal stimuli. So either water turgidity throughout the plant or nyctinasty is the term for today, which is a plant circadian rhythm, which a lot of Marantaceae or your prayer plants go through when they fold their leaves up throughout the day.
All right, it's like 2 minutes and 15 seconds in, and I am confused. I am very, very confused. But
All right, let's break it down.
Yeah, let's break it down then. So nastic and tropisms, and lots of different tropisms. What do you think is the most common?
Probably phototropism.
Okay,
so
that makes sense.
Phototropism is the movement in regards to light. So there is positive and negative phototropism. So as most leaves and stems of a plant from the apical tip of a plant, as they grow towards a light source. That is positive phototropism.
Okay, so the negative would be not wanting to see the light?
Okay, so think of the experiment would be if you take a seedling and you put it in a box and the box just has one hole cut out of it. That seedling inside the box is going to move itself to try to kind of angle itself to grow towards and through that one hole where the light is. So that movement towards and through the hole is positive phototropism.
Because it's following the light.
Exactly. If you take the box off, and let's say that hole was on the side of the box, so now the plant has kind of slanted some, and you remove the box, it's now going to bend to correct itself, and that bend would be negative phototropism because it is correcting itself kind of away from the light to then get back onto a tract that is then positive again.
And the plant wants to make that kind of like boomerang back?
Right. So the plants, through different hormones, are able to regulate their movements through cell elongation in a way that will always put it towards the most direct source of the light.
Okay, so some plants want to move for this light tropism.
Yes.
Is that the only way that they want to move, or?
Well, no. So that's phototropism, which is in regards to light. So then gravitropism, which I think is kind of more amazing than phototropism, is movement in regards to gravity. So roots are positively gravitropic, which means So gravity, as you know, is a force that pushes down on us and keeps us on the ground.
Makes me heavy.
Right. So roots, as they grow down into the ground, are positively gravitropic because they are allowing gravity to push it further down.
Interesting.
Leaves and stems on most plants are negatively gravitropic, which means that they grow against gravity as they grow taller and taller.
But to possess any one of these skills doesn't mean that that's the only one. Like, would it be possible for you to be two different tropisms at the same time?
Oh yeah, all of these are occurring simultaneously within the plant. So really it comes down to the hormones that I mentioned. There's 5 main plant hormones. So each of these hormones work in different ways in different parts of the plant to allow them to respond and move through these tropic movements in a way that best let them grow to the best of their ability under these circumstances. So a plant, at the same time that it is being positively phototropic and growing towards the light, it is also being negatively gravitropic and growing against gravity.
Oh my goodness. Zach.
Sorry, I'm processing.
Yeah, I'm trying to think through this too, but I'm trying to think of like.
So if you have a plant that is like a hanging plant or something that you would find up in the trees or something,
Sure.
is that is that still, the roots are still going down and the leaves and everything are still going up, or is that a different situation because it's attached to something that's already
elevated? That's a good scenario. So I would have 2 things for you. If it's a plant that is normally, as plants grow up higher and higher, typically they are trying to get closer to the light source, whether it be the sun or artificial lighting. Those plants are growing upwards, one, to get closer to the light, but also against gravity because that is just in a plant's nature how they grow.
Right.
There are speculations that some, especially in the aeroids, there are some monsteras, Rhaphidophora, things like that when they send out runners, the runners actually will go through something called scototropism, which is darkness. So the hypothesis is the plant will send out a runner looking for the darkest spot because they believe that the darkest spot is actually at the base of a large tree or canopy where the most leaves are, won't allow any light to penetrate. So that if they find that base of that tree, they then know that it's something that they can climb up to then eventually gain height.
So they're looking for not so much their food or their water for the day, but they're kind of looking for their home. They're kind of house shopping, if that makes sense.
Exactly. But it's interesting that the idea of this runner could be presented with light and they will grow against the light to try to find the darkest spot in the hopes to then eventually climb.
Oh my
which
goodness.
is very interesting and kind of goes against like everything that plant biology would tell you, but
yeah, now this is kind of a special circumstance. We didn't take any notes ahead of this podcast, so I'm just asking you all the questions I want to ask you. But like, what does the plant know the difference, for example, between like winter and spring? Like if it's sending out those, kind of exploratory, runners to try to find some of this darkness, and it's winter and there's not a whole lot of tree coverage, does it get confused? Like, can that lead to the plant not finding what it wants? Or is a plant always going to just try to find like the best scenario it can in the situation, be like, well, this wasn't exactly what I was looking for, but this home will do?
You have to keep in mind that there's on average 220,000 plants out there, species.
Oh my goodness.
So, using the term plant and asking a general question, will it do this or will it do this, is kind of general and will depend on the type of plant and their growth habit. There's another tropism known as thermotropism. So weeds, usually like lawn weeds, are found to be thermotropic. So thermo is weather in regards to if you're thinking winter or spring, to answer your question, that in the colder months, they will actually grow horizontally because they'll stay closer to the ground where the ground is warmer. And then once it warms up, they then will grow upwards.
But they're aware of kind of the temperature and the seasons and will base where they grow
Exactly.
on that rather than on trying to find a particular amount of light or water or whatever.
Exactly.
Now, is there plants that search just for the water side of things and don't look or aren't prioritizing the light side of it?
So water seeking, I would say, goes primarily back to negative gravitropism in the roots. So to go into some of the science of how it works.
Tell me the science.
Okay.
Tell me the science.
It's pretty cool. So the way that gravitropism is assessed, I mean, you got to think like birds, they say, have magnets in their brains. That's how they know where north is. That's how they can migrate and everything. You got to think of a plant. How does a plant know that up is up and down is down? There are cells in the tips of a root, known as the part of the root is known as root cap. And there are cells there that have starch molecules that basically contain this weight and this electrical charge to them that they respond to gravity. So in a root cap, they will sink to the bottom of the root cells, and that is how that root cell knows that bottom is down. Whereas in a tissue of a leaf or stem, they will be on the other side. So like actually if you were to take a plant and tip it on its side, the idea of that plant turning and then, correcting itself, what happens is those starch cells will actually fall to the bottom of what once was the side will fall to the bottom, and that plant now knows how to orient itself back again.
So you're telling me that plant is not then bending. Okay, so visual picture, the plant falls over on its side, right? It's laying down, horizontally. You're telling me that the let's say we did it to a monstera, just a traditional monstera, maybe in a smaller pot, right? You lean it to the side. Its ability to turn back up, to orient itself up and down, is not based on looking for light, but is instead, or at least partially responsible because of this way that the roots are aware of its orientation?
Okay, so I'm sorry, those are two separate things. The roots responding with the starch is in regards to negative gravitropism. The starch in the leaf correcting, or the stem correcting itself, is for positive gravitropism. They're functioning separately.
Are they aware of each other?
Yes. I mean, the roots, so there's 4 plant organs. So you have stems, leaves, roots, and then reproductive organ is flower. So your roots, stems, and leaves are all hooked up through, the vascular tubing and everything. So they're all fully aware of each other. Even though they can work on opposite spectrums, they definitely are aware. To answer your question, I would say it's all kind of intertwined and playing together. Yes, it is correcting itself because the light is upwards, but the plant is aware that the light is up and that it is on its side because of these starch things, falling down to this part, and they're
For
able
the roots
to
kind of
use that.
reorienting itself.
Exactly.
That's crazy. So they are aware of gravity in their own way, kind of like the birds are in that way.
Yep.
That is wild. Have you ever, this kind of reminds me of another great podcast episode that I would encourage people to go listen to. It's by a podcast called Radio Lab. Have you ever listened to, I think the episode is named, if I remember this correctly, it's awesome. I believe the episode's name is Smarty Plants.
No, I have not.
Okay. So I'm probably butchering the story, but it goes to demonstrate something you were talking about, which is like this whole plants are aware of so much more than like we can give them credit for.
Oh, yeah.
Because in this controlled lab environment, I forget what plant it is, but for the sake of my story and retelling it, we'll call it a tomato. They had a tomato in a pot with 2 pieces of PVC
I've heard about this.
separated by several feet from the tub, and yet the roots on the inside soil of the contained pot that shouldn't have been aware of which PVC pipe was where, they ran water continuously through one pipe and left the other one dry, and beneath the soil line, all of the roots were going in the direction of the running pipe that was several feet away from them.
Absolutely. I mean,
So this is kind of
exactly
this is
correct.
kind of the scientific backing of that in a way of
Yes.
these tropism characteristics are what kind of makes that possible. By the way, I would totally encourage anyone to go check out that Radiolab episode.
Yeah,
it's
and
super cool. Like the way that they visual, like just all those NPR shows where they have all the sound effects and
Oh, yeah.
everything. Like maybe one day we'll get that good. But
No, I know exactly what experiment you're talking about. And it is very. I've always said it, and I mean, people think I'm crazy for multiple reasons, but I've always said that plants have minds. Whether or not their minds are as advanced as ours or dogs,
or whether we understand it at all.
Exactly.
You know, I mean, there's plenty of things that we don't understand, but yet we find out 25 years later, like, oh no, that was a thing the whole time. We just like science didn't have a way of proving it.
Well, and then, I mean, going back to the starch molecules for the gravitropism, that was the standard procedure, but now science has said there are plants out there that the root cap cells don't have any starch molecules, but they're still able to do negative gravitropism. And then other scientists will say that it really relies primarily on some of the plant hormones playing into effect. So, I mean, there are a lot of things out there that we can keep doing studies, but because there are so many different plants and they all work in different ways, it's not always one rule for everything.
That's wild. That's absolutely wild. So what is there like a rule? Is each species kind of demonstrating all these things, or do plants typically have, kind of have, what type of tropism they have for their roots, what kind of tropism they have for light, or do they all kind of contain all of them?
I would say most plants are going to generally follow phototropic and gravitropic growth movements. That's just kind of in the nature of plant physiology and how they grow. There are different movements that are particular for certain species or types of plants. So to go back to Nastic movements. So Nastic movements, like I said, are movements that don't involve an external stimuli, but are more reliant on internal stimuli. So nyctinasty is the big Nastic movement that I think of and that people will see and can kind of think of once I explain it. So nyctinasty is the term for plant circadian rhythm. So Marantaceae, which are your prayer plants, so your Stromanthe, your Tenanthe, your Maranta, those types of plants will orient their leaves in a 24-hour period in a different way. So it's kind of like a windmill type.
Yeah, like a solar panel kind of following the sun in a weird way.
Exactly, but they call it a Nastic movement because it isn't in regards to the relation of the sun or anything like that. And to be honest, they don't have an actual explanation of why they do this. Some scientists say it's for, transpiration and like respiratory things. So if the leaf is folded up, it doesn't transpire as much water, like it doesn't lose as much water. But general plant biologists kind of have it out there that they don't really understand why some of these plants do this.
But it's not because of the light or the other things that the traditional tropisms would cover.
Exactly.
So like maybe even keeping itself safe from a predator or something, like, maybe it's less colorful or something if it folds itself up.
Right. And so, I mean, those are things that they think of. So if you think of Mimosa Pudica, the sensitive plant, they have turgid movements. So it's another type of Nastic movement where basically they will use these specialized cell groups called pulvini, and at the base of each leaf under the petiole, they can, when the leaf is touched or hit in some way, it will, in a short burst, release the water pressure that is stored in those leaves, which then allows the leaves to fold up. It's very much a machine in that way, that if you think the pool is full of water and then you quickly release all of the water, if it was like an above ground pool or something, that pool's going to deflate in a way. So,
or almost like a muscle when you tense and you have that like kind of, you know what I mean? When your muscle contracts like that.
So they can see scientifically how it's happening. They understand that the water, turgidity is being released, and that is what causes it to fold up. and they can hypothesize that this plant does it as a way to protect itself from being chewed on by a pest, because if an insect lands on the leaves and the leaves fold up and it no longer has anything to land on, well, now that plant is safe from being eaten. They can hypothesize that, but they don't have any real scientific backing to show that that is why. That's what we're seeing and that's what we're thinking, but we have nothing to prove it.
Yeah, it's one of those situations where you have to kind of like put your own mind to it.
Yeah.
But like, as we're saying, plants can have a mind of their own that we may not understand. Right. You're kind of almost, I mean, I wouldn't like to be a scientist in that sense, just because you're kind of like, yeah, you're coming up with something and you're kind of hypothesizing it. And really you're just waiting until somebody else proves you wrong.
That's what science is.
Not proving you right, but just proving like, no, we know for a fact it's not that.
That's what the best scientists do, is they try to find an answer until someone can prove them wrong, because until someone can prove them wrong, that's the best we know. But as a scientist, you need and you strive for someone to prove you wrong just to gain more backing to your own point.
Now, this may be out of your wheelhouse, because I realize that this is a kind of out there question, but it's just kind of the day I'm having. Is this, or some of this, kind of wrapped up into why, for example, they send plants and things like to the space station, is to kind of try to study some of these, like if gravity isn't there, what happens to that molecule that would normally be, you know what I mean? Because they're whenever they ask, it's always funny whenever they ask astronauts, because they're there to be astronauts. They're there to. I couldn't survive being launched on a rocket, I'll tell you that. And I know a lot about plants. I don't know about you, Brett. Maybe you want to go to space?
I would love to send plants to space and do.
But would you go to space?
Oh yeah, I'd go in space.
You'd go to no gravity? You think you could handle it?
We need to do the Gabby to the moon. So if you want to volunteer to go,
put me in that thing that spins you around, the like centrifugal force and all that. Oh yeah, I love that.
You want to do that?
Oh yeah. I would love to do that.
I've never seen Brett's eyes get bigger than when he just said like, I would love to do that. Oh my god, Zach, would you go to the moon? Like, would you go to outer space? Like, would you go to outer space with no gravity?
I wouldn't be the first person to. Like,
okay, so you're not signing up for like the beta program.
Yeah, no. I don't need the discounted tickets or anything. I'll wait until it's proven that I can come back.
Okay.
Because Earth is pretty cool, and I would want to come back. But space also seems really sweet.
I don't know that I could do the zero gravity. Is why I always bring it. I feel like the whole like falling feeling. Something I've never really like enjoyed, and that's what you're doing constantly is just falling.
I don't know. I'm like an adrenaline freak, so like I love all that type of stuff.
And if we think we see Brett going around as like a key scientist in our greenhouse, could you imagine that guy floating around on the space station? But all seriousness, though,
yes.
Is that some of what they're trying to prove?
Yes. So there is a device called a clinostat that we actually. Well, not we, plant scientists have worked with here.
He's already imagining it. He's already including himself in the group. I love it.
That they have used here on Earth to study gravitational effects on plants. So basically what it is, this clinostat is a device that you put the plant in and the plant sits on the horizontal axis, so it's laying on its side. And this device slowly turns it, think like rotisserie chicken. And basically, by slowly turning the plant and keeping it horizontal, they are able to negate the effects of gravitropism.
Because the plant can never really...
It can't orient itself.
Right.
Because, if you think about the starches, they have no time to actually settle on a surface for the plant to grasp which way is up. So in those studies, the plant continues to grow horizontal and not up or down because it is, having those effects negated.
So they've proven with some of these plants that have this gravity tropism,
right,
that if you do remove the gravity, the plant essentially then doesn't know what to do, and by default
it'll keep growing, but it doesn't know which way is up.
Does that cause the growth to slow down?
No, not necessarily.
Interesting. So I feel like if I didn't know where I was going, you know what I mean? Like when you're on a highway and you don't know if you're supposed to take the exit, you slow down a little bit. But
because a plant's prime directive is to grow. So
that's true.
Tropisms go all the way back to when a plant is a seed. If you plant a seed upside down, it will correct itself underground in the soil. And like if the cotyledon is the seed sprout, so the very first stem shoot. If the seed is planted upside down, it will germinate pointed down, but then underground will correct itself and U-turn because it knows which way is up.
Whoa.
Yeah. So
Really?
from literally from the first cells of a germinated seed, there is these innate, put in mechanisms.
Biological way to
That's
know.
So it's like
that they
so it's
just
like
know.
sea turtles when they hatch on the beach. They all just automatically know to just go
Yeah.
straight towards the beach. And
Exactly.
if they get turned around. Oh, I guess you have to help them out if they get turned around. But
But that's only if they get turned around by something that's not
Right.
nature.
But I mean,
Most of the time, they'll figure it out.
there is instinct. I mean, it's weird to kind of use the term instinct with a plant, but it is this innate knowing or understanding that starts at a very rudimentary single-celled level that is just in these plants.
That's crazy. Now, I guess that would kind of answer my question. I was going to say, do younger plants or baby plants possess less of these characteristics? But if it's part of their personality, part of their DNA, part of their instruction set, I imagine even if you take a cutting, I'm thinking of taking a cutting of something,
Sure.
yeah, it doesn't necessarily have a root yet necessarily, but eventually it's going to get to these. It's going to still possess this.
Unless you were to remove, the original studies when they were trying to find out what caused these tropisms and whatnot, a lot of these key factors or parts of the plant that allow them to orient themselves typically are in the root caps or in the shoot, the tip of the shoot of the leafy part of the plant. So if you were to remove the root caps or the tip of the shoot, they can kind of get discombobulated and lose their bearings. But unless you were to remove those very specific, very small tips of those parts, generally no. Every plant is able, and every part of the plant is able to still function this way.
That's absolutely wild. That's crazy. Also, I just want to bring it back to you threw out the type of movement as Nick Nastic, which I'm pretty sure is a rapper. I'm not sure, but I'm pretty sure Nick Nastic would be a really good rap name.
yeah, I thought that was a person the entire time you were saying it. I
Yeah.
was like, who is this? This guy
Nick
has the best
Nastic.
name.
Yeah, like, he's got to have a good single
DJ
out.
Nick Nasty coming to you on the radio. I love it.
That's Brett's alter ego if he ever gets to it. So what other types of movements maybe we haven't covered other than obvious? Now, when we're talking about these different movements, you said, if you remove parts of the roots, that's going to discombobulate it. Is that obviously going to be part of why repotting is something you got to be careful with too?
No, I mean, when I say remove the root cap, this is on like a scientific, like in a lab, in a microscope level. Like you repotting a plant maybe will remove a few root caps, but I mean, you have to realize that there's thousands or million root caps in a potted plant, that it's not going to affect it in that way.
Well, that's a really good way of saying kind of what I was alluding to, which is that roots are not just the single root you see, because
Right.
roots are constantly branching.
Yes.
So there may be multiple of these cells and different points of a root. It's not just a matter of trimming off what we would think of if you have pull a plant that's been rooting in water out and you have a really
Right.
long runner and you just like haircut the bottom.
We could do a whole nother podcast on root cell differentiation. I love differentiation. and
Coming next
everything,
week,
but so
root cell differentiation.
there are four parts of a root. Your root cap, your root hairs, then there's the region of elongation, and then the region of maturation. So in each of those parts, different processes form, and then all four of those parts are in each root that you see. So when I say root that you see, I mean every tendril of that root, not that just entire, surface. I mean, a rhizosphere, which is the rhizosphere is the world of the roots, basically, like everything happening below the soil. There are hundreds of thousands of roots going on, and each of those hundreds of thousands of roots have each of those four areas of the roots that all do the different things. I mean, there's so many things going on that, yeah, like, it's not just one it's not just one that you would mess up by repotting. There's like so much going on.
Kind of like a human. I mean, we have lots of different vessels.
Absolutely.
But at the same time, if you interrupted an artery, if you
Right.
went and chopped something really big, you're probably going to have a problem.
Right.
But you could also probably get away with, hurting yourself in a small way or breaking something and breaking some smaller veins and,
Right, and I mean,
different things.
just
It's
like,
not going to be the end of the world.
If you have something like, and you're repotting a plant that is super root bound, the general idea is to break up the roots some to then allow the roots to, heal and grow outside of that conformed space that they were in. Yes, you are harming some of those roots that are there, but it is in the idea of overall plant health down the line that you're going to allow the plant to grow fuller and better after that.
Now, one thing I'm curious, I know this is getting a little bit more into roots and stuff, but since we were talking about the gravity fed and things, what happens when a plant hits the bottom or what it sees as the bottom, whether it's the bottom of the pot? Obviously, if it's in the bottom of a nursery pot, it has the
Sure.
opportunity to just grow right out the bottom. But I've often thought about, in Florida, we have a fairly low, a fairly shallow planting depth before you get to a much harder rock layer that
Right.
you'd really have to be like an oak tree or something to root through. So when a plant hits that, does that throw off its, if it hits the bottom of gravity, quote unquote, does that throw off its ability to know its orientation if it has to begin to grow roots in like a horizontally parallel way? You know what I'm saying? Like if it has to hit the bottom of the kind of water level or whatever and then split, does that mess up its own definition of right side up?
Okay, so great question. So not only is gravitropism at play there. So yes, the plant root is going to grow down due to negative gravitropism. Obviously, if it's in a pot or if it is somewhere where there is, a water table or whatnot, it will encounter a hard surface or something that is blocking the gravitropism from happening, and it can't grow down anymore. So that's known as thigmotropism, which is growth in regards to a solid object. So the thigmotropism is going to play with the gravitropism, that the plant is going to try to keep growing down. It can't, so that's why it'll then circle and circle and circle on the bottom of a pot instead of growing back up, because it's essentially pushing down, trying to go down as far as possible, can't, so in that way it still needs to grow, so it's then going to grow horizontal.
But in that kind of circling motion, in a way, it's still actively trying to go further down,
Right.
even though it knows that answer is no.
And if it circles that pot 3 times, but then finally finds a drainage hole, it will then immediately correct itself and grow down through that drainage hole, because it basically found what it was seeking.
But in a scenario where it's not a potted plant, but potted in the ground, and it were to
Sure.
hypothetically hit it, would it do that same circle behavior? Or because you have more space, it's going to spread out?
It will spread out, and that's why some trees, some big trees, their rhizosphere and their root mass can be found and traced, 300, 400 feet from the trunk of the tree, because
That's
those roots
crazy.
are just traveling and traveling and traveling. I mean, some of these huge live oaks that we have out here that are 100, 200 years old, I mean, I would bet money that those roots go close to half a mile from,
Right.
from where the base of that tree is.
Because a plant doesn't have any inherent nature or desire to want to stop.
Right.
Which I think is one of those weird things where in the wild, that makes perfect sense. But it is one of those scenarios where just like an animal, when you have it kept inside, for like kind of for your home use, you're introducing something that it wouldn't necessarily have, which is kind of a finite end. If
Right.
you're using a pot with no drainage or with minimal drainage, it is going to do that circling thing. But that's not what a plant would typically find in the wild. It would make sense
Correct.
that it wants to keep going because the plant doesn't have any command that says like, well, once you've found enough, stop.
Well, and you have to, these plants, and going back to plant movements, you have to also think like, not only is their prime directive to grow, but their prime directive is also to reproduce. And in reproduction, you want to kind of spread your seed as far and as wide as possible with as many things as possible. So these plants don't have legs to walk on. So, if their best way of getting 20 feet away is by putting out a rhizome or something under the ground that can grow horizontally that will pop up 20, 30 feet away in the hopes of then flowering farther away to then be able to be pollinated by something that isn't as close to the mother plant. That's what it's going to do because that's ultimately one of the prime directives.
Is that also why you will sometimes, or maybe it's just my observation, so this could not be science, right? But like at times when you force a plant to become root bound, it goes into its reproductive state quicker maybe than it otherwise would have.
Yes.
Because it kind of sees not the end, but no light at the end of the tunnel. There, like, you know what I mean? It doesn't
cap.
Yeah.
I was going to use the term "it sees the end." It sees an end.
Okay.
I would agree with that. That these plants have an idea or an understanding that, hey, I've reached full capacity. I can't get anywhere else. So either I'm now low on nutrients because I've used all of the resources in this pot, or I'm literally fully out of root space and my roots are starting to die because we're choking each other out. They see it as a way of, this may be, I may only have 6 breaths left. Let me start flowering in a way of, furthering my generations, my seed.
I had when I had asked Miriam, it was 5th grade biology teacher. And she said this one phrase just over and over again. She's like, biology is all about the babies. And she would just say that over and over and over again. And it still is like one of the only, like those weird things you take away from school and you just always remember. Like that just makes sense. And it explains animal instincts. It explains plant instincts. It explains human behavior. I mean, at the end of the day, we're all trying to do the same thing. You want to...
Reproduction is just one of those innate instinctual behaviors in almost all living organisms.
And it's just a behavior and an outgrowth of wanting to survive.
Absolutely. And furthering your genetic material.
Correct. Yeah. You want to survive as long as you can. And then when you can't anymore, you want something else to continue to survive past you. So I do think it's kind of crazy how plants can often be kind of, we think of them kind of like you said earlier, we think of them as not having a brain. We think of them not having an emotion, but they're still a living organism. They're still at the end of the day driven by that biological reality of, I got to make the most out of what I can make life. And then secondarily, I have to create something to take over once I'm no longer here.
Yeah, just the fact that it can see that problem and decide, okay, I'm going to like bloom, or like if it knows that the end is coming, or if it really doesn't have room to grow, just be able to force that reproduction state quicker, which is just crazy.
Which is the same thing plants will do too with like seasonal changes. Like we don't see that in houseplants very often, but the same type of thing when you get that first kind of cold snap, you're like, snap, winter's coming again. I got to do the whole, put out seeds or however that process is. That's crazy. So what other movements haven't we covered besides me moving things from bench to bench inside the greenhouse?
Sure. Okay. So there's a Nastic movement known as nutation, which is also known as a spiraling movement. So Charles Darwin actually did this first experiment, way back when. He was really intrigued by so many different organisms and everything. And we credit Darwin a lot with evolution in animals, like with his finches and everything. But he actually did a lot of research and paved the way in plant biology. And so he did this study where he attached a sliver of glass to the tip of a plant and put just above that glass tip a black carbon piece of paper. And what he observed was that as the plant grew, that glass shard created a spiral on the piece of carbon paper. That spiraling movement, which is the nutation, we typically can't see with our eyes, but it is how most plants grow.
Like kind of doing a spinning twirl?
A spinning twirl.
Is that like a Okay, so the only way I can kind of like equate this is like a 3D printer. You know, like a 3D printer kind of like it has to go in a particular path because it can only do one layer at a time. Is that kind of the same, but on a cell basis? Like the plant
Yes.
has to
So-
figure out which brick to put.
Exactly. So on a cellular, that's a good way of putting it, like bricks. Like on a cellular level, as the plant grows, it's going to put one at north, one at east, one at south, one
And
at
work
west,
its
one
way
at,
around.
Exactly.
That's crazy. So they actually do develop in like a circular motion.
Yep.
That's crazy.
And
Now,
so we
are
can
there
thank
any
Darwin
plants
for
that don't do that?
As far as I am aware, from what I've read, generally speaking, plant growth happens in a spiral movement.
Which I mean, that makes sense because that's what the whole tree. If you cut a tree and you see the rings,
It's like the Fibonacci
I mean,
sequence.
that's something we can go into separately. Rings on a tree are actually a development through a yearly growth of layers of like a cork cambium and a xylem and a phloem, which are part of the vascular bundles.
right, but it's got to work itself around in a circle as it builds up.
Well, those actually grow outward altogether.
Interesting.
Yeah, so the rings of a tree, the way that the rings of a tree develop is the whole ring will develop at once outward instead of it being like in a spiral.
That's why
of the growth.
you can see it from left to right and
Right.
know just the time of how
That's
long it's
crazy.
grown.
But at the top where growth is happening,
That's where you would notice the spiraling.
that's crazy. Now, does that also happen for leaf tissue, or is that noticed for only stems, or like all different parts of the plant?
We're talking like the apical tip. So this is that tip that is the shoot of the plant that you can't even see if it's a leaf or a stem yet. You know, like at the tip of it before it has differentiated into the parts.
At that point, is the cell not yet assigned what role it has, or is it just like one of those things where it knows but we can't see?
That is correct. Those cells would be undifferentiated tissues.
So they don't yet know what job they're going to have.
Absolutely.
At that top, but they come out in a spiral fashion.
Right. And then as they're laid down brick by brick, cell by cell, they then gain the assignment through different plant hormones playing into effect, and they will differentiate into either a leaf or a stem or
on this the outer edge of a whatever,
Right.
whatever that cell difference is. That's crazy. So we think that most plants do that. That's crazy.
Yes. So keep in mind, because we are talking on, the cellular level at the apical tip of the plant, we can't see that with our eyes. Now, some people will say, well, like, what about vines or tendrils that you see moving? That is going to be a twining movement. So Zach and I earlier today set up a time-lapse camera on some Hoya vines, and I also put some Calathea there so that we can get some nyctinasty, shots. But
For the album art.
Yeah.
Hoya vines, like a lot of vines or tendrils, are going to go through a twining movement where basically they will, in a spiral throughout the day, move around and around and around and around in an attempt to try to find something to then grab onto. So they're doing this as a method, again, for transportation and trying to, further their growth as far as they can.
My grandpa would call that an exploratory committee. that was his words, quote unquote, was, we'd have to start an exploratory committee on that. But that is kind of what they're doing. They're kind of they're kind of observing, checking it out, trying to get the game plan together for the rest of it.
But so those twining movements, the twining movement is not a tropism because it is happening whether or not there is anything affecting it. Whether or not there is light or isn't light, those vines are going to continually grow round and around and around until it hits something. Once it does hit something, then you go back to your tropism with, hitting a direct object, and it's then going to grab onto something and then, twine onto it, and then that becomes a tropism because it is now, encountered a solid object.
Now, it's always, this is just getting specific on Hoyas for a minute, but it's always at least been my observation that they're headed towards water. Would that mean that those exploratory ideas are still driven by a tropism of kind?
All right, so Hoyas though we grow Hoyas as houseplants, where they come from, they're technically like woody lanais, which are, it's not a tree, it's not a vine, it's not a shrub. It's kind of a woody vine that grows up in the canopy and will form, like, if you think of like a grapevine.
Yeah, I was gonna say
on an orchard that they're growing grapes. You know, you'll have the wire fence and it's just growing all completely all over that. That's how Hoyas grow in the wild, is they will form dense mats of vines up in the canopies of a tree. And so I believe that Hoyas kind of put out a vine and, you know, grow that type of way to really just explore and go as far as possible.
They do it quick.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, they do
absolutely.
it with determination. I mean, I don't know if you've been over in the Philly house earlier today. I mean, Hoyas, you can turn your head for a couple minutes and whip back around, and they're 10 feet the other direction. Like,
Yeah,
I mean, it can get out of hand.
In the first time lapse we did, there were a few in the background, and you could see them just day and night, just going crazy.
Twining around.
Yeah, just always trying to find something new.
And that's why you'll find a lot of peduncles, which are, you know, the flower spikes of a Hoya, on the long stretches of vines, because these plants think, so we assume, that I'm going to put out this vine, I'm going to put out this tendril, I'm going to find somewhere far to reach. Once I have something to grab onto, now I've extended, 5, 6, 8, 10 feet. I'm at a place where I have enough support that I can then, secure that tendril, grow somewhere else. Now let me put out a peduncle and bloom, because now I have reached a secure surface that my bloom can hang as a pendant. The term would be pendant, where it can hang, and now it can be pollinated by moths, and it's not going to be blown all over the wind.
Interesting. So part of their blooming is having to essentially find something physically stable enough for them to feel confident in producing their...
Because, moths aren't the most strongest animals in the world.
Right.
So, in order for a moth to... we could do a whole another podcast on Hoya pollination. I've dove into that, and Hoya pollination is amazing. But
you also told me you can eat the blooms.
You can eat the nectar that the blooms produce. It's actually, most of them are very, very sweet. It's a sugary substance. Most of them are very sweet.
Sorry, I just had to throw that in there because he told me the other day, he's like, yeah, I really like that Hoya because it kind of tastes like molasses. And I was like, what? And he's like, yeah, you can eat that. And I was like, so he was trying to describe to me the differences between a couple Hoyas based on what they tasted like to eat. And I was
like, well, this one pairs with peanut butter a little bit better.
Yeah, he's like, I really need a good Pinot Grigio. Or, you know what I mean? Like, he's trying to pair it with wine. I don't even understand.
But the way that the Hoya blooms work is the moth will land on the Hoya bloom, and the Hoya pollinia, so pollinia is a pollen sac, has a clip. Think of like one of those black clips that you use to hold papers together.
Oh, yeah.
It has a clip on the end of it that the moth will land on the flower, and its leg will go into the clip, and once it's like a harpoon almost, where it goes into the clip, and then as soon as the moth pulls its leg out, that pollinia sac gets stuck to the leg, and now as it pulls out, it has the pollen sac stuck to it so it can fly somewhere else. In order for that to be successful, that pollen flower needs to be secure in a way so that process can happen.
Interesting.
Just rip the flower off. And
or it would land, and because the flower is moving around so much, it wouldn't be able to actually get in there and secure itself.
Interesting. How long does it stay?
That's a good question.
But just like a normal butterfly, I'm just trying to paint the picture. It's like a normal pollination type of thing.
Right. If you think of like a honeybee, they'll collect the pollen on their legs. A lot. It sticks there.
Yeah.
So as far as I know, it would stick until it finds something else to pull it off.
That's wild. That's absolutely wild.
Yep.
Now would it land if it had that pollen from the first or whatever from the first one, and it landed in a second one? Is that kind of what it's after? Like, because obviously plants for the most part are trying to, going back to biology is all about the
Sure.
babies. We're humans. We're trying to find a mate in another human. You know, is it trying to find another Hoya specifically? So it's trying to do that same
Precisely.
leg getting stuck.
So the Hoya flowers are really evolved and formed in this specialized way, so that not only they have that one section with the pollinia that has that clip that attaches to the leg, but then it also has a part where that pollinia can be inserted, and there are parts on the inside that essentially, once it's inserted, catch it, and the moth leg can come out, but it keeps the pollinia inside.
Brilliant.
Yep.
Hoyas are brilliant.
Oh,
It's
yeah.
like they planned it or
yeah.
something.
Yeah, that's insane. That's amazing. That's awesome. That's just incredible that the particular way, because if you think about it also, that means that it's not really interested in a bee.
No.
You know, it is a flower.
Hoyas are strictly pollinated by moths.
But you know what I mean? Like that's like by design of the plant is like, you know what, we got to create this system that will let only a moth
Yeah,
help us out.
bees are already taken. They're too busy.
Bees got a lot of other things. There's prettier petals out there, you know, whatever the reason was. So
Hoyas-
like they went after moths. as,
Hoyas
like,
are
their bro.
specially modified, highly evolved plants. You also have to realize that Hoyas are in the Apocynaceae family, which is going to be your desert roses, your adeniums, your pachypodiums, which are your Madagascar palms. Like, these are plants that you don't think of as, typical flowering plants. These are, very strange, different leg of flowering plants out there that all have specialized, modified, organs and everything that really just further their evolution and again, what biology is about the babies.
That's crazy. But it's so crazy that they would get so specialized, because there's so many other flowers that are like, I'll take a bee, I'll take a wasp, I'll take anything that has like, legs and wants
Basically,
to land here.
anything that can take my pollen, I'll give it.
Right. And then you have other plants like corn that are like, screw the whole bee thing. Like, we'll just use the wind and the wind will just we'll just shoot it everywhere and we'll just hope for the best. And then you get all the way down to Hoya, which is like, no, it's got to be a moth and its legs got to be an inch long, but not longer than an inch and a half. Like, I'm sure it's probably fairly, specific too, because it probably can't fit all types. I mean, moth is a pretty big category too. You got big moths, you got baby moths, you got
absolutely
all different types of moths.
Actually, there's very few. Past couple of weeks, I've been trying to devote myself to various types of pollination, and so I've read 3 scientific papers on Hoya pollination so far. And other than those 3, I can't find anything else. There's very, very little research being done on Hoya pollination. 1, because it is so specialized, and 2, it's very hard to study in the wild because these woody lanais are, 40, 50 feet up in the canopies in the rainforest in Borneo, that there just isn't research being done or funding for research.
I was going to say, I imagine it's kind of hard to also in those situations, like, get a forklift or like get a, you know what I mean? Like, it's probably not super easy where these things are native to get a bucket truck, up there to be able to go collect or to get 50 foot up in the air. That's not an easy thing to do.
And these moths are doing the pollination at night. So now you also have to you have to do the research at night.
That's wild.
Now, is this just because of years and years of adapting and just from where they're originated from, like that it's such an extreme environment that it's just years of really coming up with that specific way?
Yes.
So you're saying is the refinement caused by like the environmental conditions of the area?
Most specialized plant adaptations or evolutionary mechanisms, especially around reproduction, do come from environmental factors. So, I don't know the exact lineage or, how many hundreds of thousands of years ago Hoya split off from Dischidia, which is their most closely related, genetic
family
genus.
member. Yeah.
So I couldn't tell you that. But just from knowing how specialized Hoyas are, yes, I would definitely believe that it is something in regards to where they're from.
Well, that's awesome. Well, do you have anything else for us today? If not, I have kind of a crazy question to ask at the end.
Okay, so I will go back to, we were talking about, this podcast was plant movements, not Hoyas.
Hoya plant movements is what I'm going to title it.
The other pretty cool Nastic movement out there is Contractile Movements. So some plants, especially bulb type plants and some succulents that come from very arid or dry regions, have contractile roots that basically will allow the roots to pull the body of the plant deeper into the ground. So
Whoa.
they have found that if a lily seed is germinated on the top of the soil, by the time that bulb has formed, it can be anywhere from 4 to 6 inches underground.
Because the roots are the thing?
Because the roots are able to contract in a way that continually pull it deeper and deeper and deeper, because in order for that bulb to form, it needs the protection of the soil. So likewise, you'll see it in Haworthia, where, Haworthia, if they're from the Namibian desert, where it's extremely hot, they need to be able to pull themselves in time of drought deeper into the soil for protection from the sun.
Oh my goodness! So you're sorry. I'm dumbfounded by this. I asked if there was anything more to go over, and I was not expecting this. So you're saying that like they can literally pull themselves down, and that's not because of gravity, but that's because of the way almost like a snake works by contracting itself.
Right.
Like the roots are literally doing that.
Right.
Does that
like an accordion, basically?
Yeah. Does that cause like anti-growth? Like, does that stunt the roots' growth, or is that just something that they can do?
It is a mechanism that the roots have in place for the overall survival of the plant. So if anything, I would say it furthers the growth of the plant by being able to do this.
And it'll just pull itself down until it finds a depth that it knows it'll be
Either
safe and
safe
find the
from
nutrients.
the environments, or deep enough, like in the case of a bulb, deep enough that it is able to grow without being open to like predators trying to eat it, or also deep enough that it can then put out a sprout of leaves that it has enough security in the ground that it's not going to tip over.
That's crazy. Now, would you say that behavior is still driven by kind of what we talked about earlier with the plant knowing which way is right and wrong? Like if you were to take what you just said now and you do the whole turn it on its side, is it still capable of pulling itself, or is it using, I guess what I'm asking is it using like feedback, like a response from the leaves to say, okay, now I'm far enough down, or is the roots itself know how deep the root needs to be and that's what it's going for?
To summarize, a tropism, or a tropic movement, is a movement in regards to external stimulus, like the sun or gravity. Contractile movement is a Nastic movement that is in regards to an internal stimuli. So the plant doesn't need gravity or the sun or anything. It does have the hormone level and the differentiation in its own body to be able to sense when enough is enough.
So it has understanding of itself.
Yes, and in the same way, these Haworthia in the desert that can pull themselves deep into the soil, once it starts raining again, their contractile roots can release and it can move itself back up.
Oh, snap.
That was going to be my next question, is can it go back
fully
up?
aware.
Okay.
Yes, they're fully aware and they know how to adjust as needed.
But they're doing that within their own mind. I'm putting air quotes, but a mind of their own, not relying on but that answers the question. It's not the roots are going far enough down to get to 98 degrees instead of 120 or whatever, like the environmental factor would be. It kind of in and of itself knows whether or not essentially it's getting hurt or it's getting sunburnt, not how many inches it is.
And there's just so many variables and factors that go into play. I mean, it's crazy to think that there are 5 main plant hormones, but these 5 hormones kind of are responsible for all of these things that we've discussed and able to regulate and move and grow and change and spin all these different plant parts just to further their growth to the best of their ability.
Every plant has a story.
Yes.
That's crazy. Yes. Now, one last question before we go, just because to get back to the Hoya chat.
Sure.
With the whole, sorry, I'm just distracted and I want to ask this question and you probably don't even know the answer. But with the Hoya always sending out its search committee looking for something, right? Now, if you took that and you put it into zero gravity, by its tropisms, would it still, because it's not...
Okay, so a twining movement is a Nastic movement.
Okay, so it's one that
It
the
is separate
plant
from
knows,
gravity. It will continue to spin even if it was upside down.
or it was unaware based on gravity or the
Right.
sun or whatever. It would still just know based on its own.
Absolutely.
That's crazy. You did know the answer. Look at that. That's crazy.
You tried
So-
to stump them.
Yeah, I know. So you guys have a time lapse of the whole Hoya.
We have twining movement and nyctinasty, which are both Nastic movements being recorded on a time lapse now. So shortly after this podcast is released, we will be able to put out a video where you guys can see firsthand what we have going on in our greenhouse.
Yeah, definitely going to want to check the Instagram at Every Plant Story for that clip. We'll probably post that probably Thursday, the 17th of June or so ish. The podcast may come out sooner than that, but we will get that video up to you guys. I know Zach's going to have to edit that. Well, Brett, thank you so much for sharing all this crazy stuff
Of
about, I
course.
mean, this is so cool. And it's such a cool chapter in the fact that every plant does have a story. I mean, we say it a lot, but this is just, I mean, a chapter of their book of
Exactly.
the encyclopedia of a plant. You know, this is just one, I don't want to call it small or micro, but it's just one micro, aspect. It'd just be like saying that humans are a bunch of muscles. Like, it's not quite that simple, but it's a huge part of what they're doing.
It's one step to fully understanding or trying to understand what makes a plant a plant.
Yeah, that's awesome. And through it, every one of us can better care for the plants in our homes and around our communities and in our environment. So that's awesome. Well, thanks so much for being with us, Brett. We'll definitely have you back very soon. Like we said, next week we'll have to be on, what was the topic next week you wanted to do? Not Hoya Chat, the other
Roots.
one.
Roots.
Yeah, we got to go into roots,
2
right?
weeks is Hoya. We'll come back.
Yeah, Zach's keeping the calendar here. Well, thank you guys so much for listening to this episode of the Every Plant Story podcast. You can find more about the podcast on our website, everyplantstory.com. And we'd encourage you to rate and review us on your favorite podcast app and follow us on Instagram at Gabriella Plants Online. And with that, we'll see you guys next week.
Bye, guys.
See ya.